Hey everybody, in this video we're going to go over the different medical jargon that you'll hear a lot with babies in the PCICU or the Pediatric Cardiology Intensive Care Unit. This is designed to kind of help you be able to interact with your medical professionals as you go through rounds, and they are really helpful for that reason. I am not a medical professional, by the way. I am a teacher, so this is not me saying that I am the end-all be-all, but these are all different terms that my wife and I have learned and used while we've been here in the PCICU going on 45 days now. And so it really becomes helpful because most of these terms you'll see on a daily basis, especially early on. As you wean off some of the supports, you may not see them as much, but at least for us, for like the first 40 days, we used almost all of these at least at some point throughout the day, between either the morning rounds or the evening rounds. So this just helps you understand more of what's going on and allows you to interact and advocate more for your child at the rounds because you know more. So hopefully y'all enjoy it. And first one is apnea or apneic. I'm sure you've probably heard of sleep apnea where people stop breathing. That's what apnea is. It happens sometimes with certain drugs that they'll probably get while they're on the PCICU floor. The medical professionals be aware of it, they'll be able to monitor it, it'll be fine, but that is something that they may use in terms of that if they use the word apneic or apnea, then you know what is going on. They may also use the word bradycardia or bradycardic, meaning that their heartbeat goes slower or is getting really slow, and that is one of the things that may happen depending on what happens with them. It happened with our son once or twice, and so epinephrine helps kind of keep it elevated. Same thing with bradypnea. If somebody becomes bradypnic, it's instead of the heart rate, it is the lungs and the breathing. So if their breathing rate gets really low, like really low, like 8 to 15 times a minute, which is incredibly slow, then it becomes bradypnic, and that is not a good thing. CAP, cardiac arrest prevention plan. It's what our son had to have, and luckily he did have it because when he went into cardiac arrest, they had all of the drugs pulled and ready, so that way, it happens and boom, everything's able to go and just kind of be in line. An ET tube or endotracheal tube is what you get intubated with a ventilator. He was on one for 42 days, and so it just goes in the mouth and then down and is in the lungs. I'm going to talk a little more about like how that works and what it is and some of the terms with it when we get to the ventilator. Also, extubation is when the ET tube comes out. It's when they extubate or take it out. A Foley catheter, which John David had, is where they basically have a catheter that goes up to the bladder and then it empties the bladder. Goals, you'll hear this a lot, and goals are going to be like the range of what they want him or her to be in. So for example, a MAP goal for him was 45 to 55 at one point. Currently it's 55 to 65. And so goals can change over time depending on what the medical team deems necessary or how long you've been in the hospital. A G-tube, which he has not had yet, is a feeding tube that is directly in the stomach. Hypertension, you'll hear this one a lot, hyper and hypotension. Hyper is too high, hypo is too low. And so talking about the MAP is the mean arterial pressure, meaning his blood pressure. If it is too high, that's hypertensive. Too low, hypotensive. Both have negatives, but you would rather be hypertensive than hypotensive. You'll probably hear your medical professional say that at some point. And again, they have ways of dealing with this if it does happen. Intravenous or IVs are the lines that you see them going into the veins, and they're used to draw blood, they're used to give nutrients, they're used to give drugs. You'll see a lot of them, and they all have different types, like an A line or arterial line will be there mainly to measure like the MAP pressure or the MAP, and then also to draw blood. The central line is a line that's close to the heart. A PICC line is also a line that's close to the heart, but instead of going in through here, it goes in through the arm or the leg. And then a PRN or a bolus is where they give medicine where it is just a one-time dose, whereas a drip is continuous and keeps going. So depending on what your child needs, they may get a bolus or a PRN. Those terms are the same. It's the same thing. You just get a one-time dose versus a drip where it's just a constant drip, and there'll be a machine which we jokingly call a Christmas tree, but it's where all the IVs are hooked up to, and they'll have like a pump for each drip, making sure that it goes at the rate it needs. Intubate is where they intubate and put that ET tube in. A map, as I told you earlier, the mean arterial pressure, and it's really important. You and I as adults typically have 120 over 80. That's kind of like the perfect blood pressure. So our pulsatility is 40, and pulsatility is that top number minus the bottom number. And you typically, for adults, want that to be around 40. But for babies, they kind of want that to be anywhere from like 20 to 30, especially like newborns. As they get older, it should get closer to, our normal of like 40 in between. And then nasal cannulas is where you have the high flow or low flow oxygen, where it comes right here, it comes around the ears and right here, and just helps feed oxygen into their nostrils. Then you have a nasogastric tube, which usually you'll call it an NG tube. An NG tube is where it goes in their nose and goes down to their stomach. It's how they typically will feed them with drip feeds. It's actually what John David is on right now. And then a sat probe. Typically it'll be on their finger, or they can tape it around their foot, or it's sometimes palm their hand, but it will just give you an idea of what the oxygen saturation is in their body, which is really important for like cardio babies, because that's one of the things that your heart's really important for, is working with your lungs to send oxygenated blood throughout your body. And so that kind of gives them an idea of like what the blood flow is doing and things like that. So on you and I, it would be somewhere between like 96 and 100. On these babies, it's going to be whatever goal that your team has kind of arranged. So for example, John David for a long time stayed between 70 and 75, but now he is between 75 and 85, and that's kind of where they want to keep him. Over time he'll kind of drop some, but again, the SAT probe helps you find out about your O2 sats, or your oxygen saturation. Then you have tachycardia, where your heart is beating too fast, which is also bad. You don't want that. And then you have tachypnea, which is where you are breathing too fast. Again, don't want that, because not good enough oxygen exchange, and so then you get deoxygenated blood. Trach tube, which hopefully you won't ever have to have this. John David did not have to have it, thankfully, but it's where, if you've ever watched The Heat with Melissa McCartney and Sandra Bullock, it's where they do the, if you ever watched Grey's Anatomy, you've probably seen this, where they do the trach tube, and it's basically to bypass all of this for breathing, so you have an airway. Then ventilator. So ventilators are a pretty big thing, especially for cardio babies, because like I said earlier, the lungs and the heart work together quite a lot in order to oxygenate the blood and help make the body work. So FiO2 is the amount of oxygen that you're on, so like 40%, 50%, 60%. Currently, John David's on 50%. Positive end expiratory pressure, or PEEP, is one of the ones that you'll see on there. It'll say PEEP, and then there'll be a number there. I think the lowest number is 5, and that's the lowest you can be on. Is where they'll do a lot of your ERTs, or extubation readiness test. And then you have peak inspiratory pressure, or PIP, and so the PIP is also a pressure. And the difference between these, one's PEEP, the other one's PIP. PEEP is basically the amount of pressure that stays in the lungs to keep them open, make sure they don't collapse when you're breathing out. And then the PIP, the PIP, is basically the maximum amount of pressure that goes in the lungs, so like the top of your inhalation. So you hear, that's the PIP, the PIP, and then the PEEP, the PEEP is there. And again, it basically prevents them from completely closing the lungs and having the alveoli, the pieces inside, to close. So that way their lungs don't collapse from, like, a lot of times fluid, because they're having heart surgery and there's fluid built up in their chest. That's what John David had for a very long time. Then the other big thing is respiratory rate, going back to brachypnea and tachypnea, where you're breathing too slow or breathing too fast. Your respiratory rate will kind of give you that idea of which one you're doing, whether it be a really low number, which would be brachypnea, or really high number, tachypnea. So it just depends on which end you're on. Ideally, you're in the middle, which for newborns, I think is somewhere between like 40 and 60 is kind of where they wanted him to be. Again, that's going to change depending on your child's age, what the goal of the medical team is, and they'll let you know that goal when you talk to them. And then the tidal volume is how much they're getting on each one of these. They're called a tidal volume because it'll look like a tidal wave. It just keeps going up. And for him, they wanted him to stay between like 6 and 8-ish. And so that was his goal tidal volume. But you'll see it on the ventilator if your child's on it, and you'll see what they are. And then the big four for vitals, which you'll see on the screen next to your child, are heart rate, MAP, which we talked about earlier, is the mean arterial pressure, the respiratory rate, and then the O2 saturation. There are more than those four. However, those are the biggies. Those four are the ones that you will pretty much focus on and be able to kind of like look at and automatically know like something's wrong with your kid. So again, they'll give you goals on all these things, and again, you may be wondering why I'm going over all these things. These are all things I wish I'd known before I got in here. I knew heart rate, and I knew, a little bit about O2 saturation, but I didn't know all of these ins and outs, and it would have been a lot more helpful to try and know all these things and learn all these things prior to getting into the situation of trying to like understand things in rounds, because it makes a very long round when you have to play 21 questions every time and ask what all this stuff means. So this is what we've learned. Again, I'm not a medical professional, but this is what we've learned in our stay, and all of these terms that I've got on here have been used a lot, like almost every time that we've rounded. And so you will hear these almost on a daily basis while you're here. And so it's just good to know them, and good for you to be able to interact and be able to advocate for your child in the rounds. And it's kind of hard to advocate if you don't have this knowledge. So hope this helps, and y'all have a good night and God bless.